Hey everyone, I'm Tokareva. I'm a digital artist, researcher, designer, project manager by day, amongst other things. And I'm here to present a talk titled BYMG, Intoxicated Interface Infusion Fermentation Tactics. Cool, so I want to start this talk with giving a nod to some of the thinkers and texts that have really influenced my research lately. In particular, I think Anna Tsing's The Mushroom at the End of the World has been really formative in the way that I've been thinking about yeast in developing BYMG, as well as Legacy Russell's Glitch, Feminism Manifesto, the book of which has been published recently, which you should check out. Right, so this talk is based on an essay that I wrote titled Baba Yaga Myco Glitch, which was published just last month in the Queer Feminist Decolonial Ecologies dossier, which is also a bit of a mouthful. It's been published alongside a bunch of really interesting texts, so if you're interested, you can download it for free on contemporary.com. So, to briefly unpack the title, Baba Yaga is a witch from Slavic folklore. Myco refers to mycology, the study of fungi, including mushrooms and yeast. And glitch refers to a failure or break in the system. Baba Yaga Myco Glitch then invokes the spirit of the Russian witch in an act of refiguring, as coined by the artist Mauritian Aliari, to trace the history of fungal entanglements between the state, sustenance, and subversion. It aims towards a speculative model for instigating systemic change via collaboration with mutant hallucinogenic yeast agents distributed and activated through a global network of starters. Sourdough bread has been made in collaboration between humans, wild yeasts, and local bacteria around the world for over 5,000 years. Baba Yaga Myco Glitch seeks to seize and hijack this means of small-scale sustenance production. Baba Yaga Myco Glitch is, by turn, a conspiracy theory, a rumor, or a benevolent bioweapon. So who's Baba Yaga? Well, unlike the usually dutiful, docile maidens of many Russian folk tales, Baba Yaga is an androgynous, anarchic witch. She embodies the archetype of the cranky crone, taunting, tormenting, or testing hapless young men and wannabe heroes. Shape-shifting and gender-ambiguous, by turn gatekeeper, helper, or child-eater, she commands the dead. She cannibalises. Baba Yaga straddles the border between life and death. She is an amalgamation of many. Baba Yaga rejects household labour, using her broom as an anti-tracking device, sweeping away her tracks and repurposing the mortar and pestle for high-speed transportation as she zooms through the deep, dark forest. For me, she is a symbol of defiance and a kind of feminist archetype that I think Russia could do with right now. In illustrations, Baba Yaga is often depicted with fly agaric. Indeed, connections between the words Baba, which means old woman, grandmother or witch, and mushrooms or fungi has been traced in several Slavic languages. Fly agaric is a fungus which has been used for its hallucinogenic properties for thousands of years. The Karyaks of northeastern Siberia either consumed these mind-shifting mushrooms directly or drank the urine of intoxicated shamans to induce a psychedelic state, which was passed between fungi and human bodies in a trail of hallucinogenic effects. So, Historically, hallucinogenic fungus has caused disruptions on a bigger scale. For example, it has been suggested that a fungus that lives on rye grain caused the infamous Salem Witch Trials, which took place in the Massachusetts town between 1692 and 1693. The symptoms of the so-called cursed girls were akin to convulsive ergotism, caused by the mycotoxic parasitic fungus that thrives on rye. If stored in damp conditions, which can result after a long cold winter and wet spring, for example, rye grains can develop ergot. When bread baked from the infected grain is ingested, the fungal growth can cause symptoms like epileptic seizures, muscle convulsions, hallucinations, and even gangrene. Many of these symptoms were demonstrated by the girls in Salem and were then ascribed to a witch's curse. In this situation, bread was used not only for bewitchment but also as an investigative tool for witch hunting. During the Salem Witch Trials, after the doctor could not tell the cause of the afflicted girl's delirium, a witch cake was the next diagnostic tool. So in this witch hunting method, rye flour was mixed with the cursed girl's urine and fed to a dog. If the dog exhibited similar symptoms, the involvement of witchcraft was confirmed. So a mere fungus may have caused the deaths of 21 people. 19 of those were convicted as witches and hanged. And it has even been speculated that ergot was responsible for causing witch hunts on a much larger scale across Europe. This thesis has been disputed at length, though. And meanwhile, around the same time in Britain, the practice of making cockle bread was recorded by pioneer folklorist John Aubrey in 1687. So Aubrey recounts that young winters of the time would get on the table, hitch up their skirts, rock to and fro, pretending to knead bread with their genitals and buttocks while reciting a rhyme. Aubrey found some evidence that this act was once practiced as a love spell. The bread was baked and gifted to the woman's desired lover to charm them. Aside from witchcraft, bread and ergot may have also played a role in altering the course of history by sabotaging an important battle. It's been suggested that the same symptoms of hallucinations, convulsions, and gangrene halted Peter the Great's 1722 attack on the Ottoman Empire, after the army ate infected bread and was forced to retreat due to the sickness. Bread, particularly sourdough dark rye bread, has been of great significance in Russian culture, where cool, damp conditions made rye easier to grow than wheat. The quintessential Russian bread is Borodinsky black bread. Now, the 1812 Battle of Borodina was one of the deadliest days of the Napoleonic Wars. The story goes that Margarita Tuchkova, the widow of General Alexander Tuchkov, who was killed in the battle, was so devastated by the loss of her husband that she built the Spasa Borodina convent on the site of the battle as a memorial. And it's rumored that some of the nuns who stayed there created Borodinsky bread to commemorate the battle. So the dark color of the added molasses represents grief, and the coriander seeds integral to its unique flavor refer to the devastating grape shot ammunition that was used in the battle. Black sourdough bread was an integral food for the Russian peasantry, making it easy to instrumentalize to carry the messages of both Orthodox Christianity and also of Russian imperialist motives. This origin of Borodinsky bread is an example that serves both causes. So Here we have bread as carrier of ideology. Black bread remained a fixture at every table also during Soviet times. Even in periods of food shortages, it remained cheap, despite the labor that went into its production. Jen Kodmina, assistant professor at the High School of Economics in St. Petersburg, explains that because of this imbalance between labor and cost, bread was, and I quote, symbolically removed from the economic system of the exchange of goods and money, end quote, and took on the symbolic status of a gift, effectively putting its receiver in debt to the giver. The giver being the Soviet state in this instance. So the provision of the daily bread to the people could be seen as a subtle method of state control. Today, Borodinsky bread is still made in compliance with a GOSD approved recipe, which is a system of technical standardization left over from Soviet times. Basically, anything produced in the Soviet Union had to be made to a specific GOSD or GOST standard. So the GOST standard 530950 document specifies the exact ratio of ingredients, appearance, shape, form, taste, and texture that the bread must possess. In this way, the country's governing structure still heavily regulates the staff of life of the Russian people. In recent times, the rye bread's symbolic reputation has been tarnished by a conspiracy theory propagated through Orthodox Christian and New Age communities, whose samizdat leaflets that herald the cheaply available bread as a carrier of destructive disease. These organizations claim that the GOST standard commercial yeast and store-bought bread is a toxic thermophilic killer yeast cultivated on human and animal bones and designed as a weapon against the Russian people by Nazis in World War II. According to these groups, the yeast also allegedly causes cancer, blood fermentation, yeast AIDS, and slowly erodes the body from the inside. So as Kodmina states, here the mistrust of bread equates to societal mistrust of the state that provides it. One alternative to store-bought yeasted bread offered by these conspiracy theorists is a return to home-baked sourdough bread. Something that we've also seen rise in popularity of with the COVID-19 lockdowns. Now, to take it to the West, a claim to state-directed poisoning also came in a surprising outbreak of ergotism that hit a small community in France in 1951. There, over 250 people became ill with bouts of hallucination, insomnia, and delirium. The event coincided with the CIA's investigation into mind-altering properties of LSD, part of Cold War-era propaganda-induced research. These links between ergot and LSD are no coincidence. Lysergic acid, derived from ergot alkaloids, is a key ingredient. It's been speculated that CIA sprayed LSD into the air to test its biochemical behavioral influence on this small township of people. So now let's shift our attention to fungi. Saccharomyces cerevisiae, the common bread yeast. Yeast is a type of fungus that grows in clusters of cells instead of long filaments like most fungi. In the 1950s, Louis Pasteur discovered that microbes are responsible for the fermentation of bread starter and alcohol. And soon after, the Fleischmann brothers began selling commercial baker's yeast, which has become the default in both home and large-scale baking today. Before yeast became commercially available in the 19th century, sourdough bread was the norm. Sourdough is made using wild yeasts as a starter for fermentation. The starter is made simply by mixing flour and water and waiting for the mixture to attract wild yeasts from the surrounding environment. Normally, within a week or so, wild yeasts begin the process of fermentation. So extracting energy from sugar and expelling the carbon dioxide gas that makes the starter bubble and the dough rise. In contrast to supermarket loaves, sourdough bread starter can also contain around 193 types of bacteria. Predominantly lactobacilli, which converts sugar into lactic acid, giving the bread its sour taste. Microbiologists Rob Dunn and Ann Madden of North Carolina State University have found that half of the bacteria in sourdough bread is shared with that of its bakers, and vice versa. So with regular exposure, their biomes intermingle. The wild yeasts begins to colonize the human. We could say they use bread as a vector for this purpose. Now, sourdough bread is sourdough bread wherever you go. It falls on a gradient of varied sourness, shape, elasticity, texture, and intensity of flavor, from Ethiopia's flat, stretchy injera to northern China's supple mantou buns. Wild yeast starters contain local microbes, and yet, despite the potential for infinite diversity, the flour and water mix attracts largely similar base strands of bacteria and fungi all over the world. We take inspiration from this existence of unique entities within a non-homogenizing whole, localized wild yeasts and microbes from the dough's human activators collaborate to create an active fermenting mass. Yeast and humans share some interchangeable genes. Our cell cycles are in sync. We use these methods to connect multiplex agencies, human and microbial, to ferment into a shimmering net of anthropocentric protocols. Underground communication networks of our kin, mycorrhizal fungi that live in symbiosis with 80% of land plants, extracting nutrients with their roots and distributing them through the wise ecosystem, are our guides. We seek to destabilize fixed forecasts and rigid structures from Salem to Siberia. We cultivate viral fungal malware that infiltrates your devices. We harvest mutant wild yeasts and transcode their ferment into data cables, bypassing the binary. Glitched yeasts ferment and metabolize energy in you to release amorous gas vapors instead of the carbon dioxide that suffocates us. No to toxicity, yes to intoxication. We need incantations into our capacitive senses to transmit signals to the network, an act of spell casting. We infect our ingestors with hallucinogenic visions of alternatives, soft power convulsions, condensations of corporeal kindness, microbial meditations. The bread is consumed, then excreted in an act of metabolism, digestion, refiguring. Harmful mimetic processes are stopped and regurgitated into transformed multiplicities. We call for a yogic yeast colonization of the human microbiota to glitch extractive relations, between sentient and non-sentient beings. We propose this recipe to get you started. 1. We developed a wild yeast rice starter. Perform the ritual, attract the Myco Glitch yeasts from the air. 2. We mix in flour and knead the dough. Hook in sensory distribution devices. Tap into the global Baba Yaga Glitch network. Conjure communication by mycofungal single-cell ether waves. 3. We proof the dough, fermenting deeper, bubbling softer. Process binaries and regurgitate. Metabolize into power source, hallucinogenic weirding of remote browsers via fungal malware. 4. We mark the dough with sigil string slashes, a release. Embed intent. 5. We bake the bread, heat pixel fusing molecular bonds. Fuse yeast strands to futures. 6. We break the bread, release sacred steam, offer it up. Distribute, ingest, transform. Consciousness fungal fusion. Our next step is further development of this diagrammatic response that aims to draw out a non-prescriptive methodology, a set of relationships for distribution, tactics, and techniques for BYMG and its wider operations. Join us.